Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Laid Back Life podcast, where we are talking about loving entrepreneurship and improving daily. In the words of Rod Serling, this week's episode calls for a totally different introduction, which we'll get to in a second. So obviously, so much of this podcast has been focused on living a better life. Last week, we had Terrell Turner on. We talked about the finances of that, how to figure out what is enough, how to dive in to what you need to be able to afford a great life. This week, I've got Dan Schnurbusch on, and we're talking, if you know Dan, you know what we're going to talk about. We're talking AI and automation. So Dan is an attorney and refers to himself now as a part-time attorney at this point, probably because of the AI and automation. Dan also runs a phenomenal Facebook page all about AI and automation, and as there are 10,000 different lawyer-focused Facebook pages, Dan stands out. So a huge credit to him, based upon, I think, the fact that you are so walking the walk of what you are talking about and like living it in the moment for everybody. Like, I am working on this integration. Here it is. This is how to use it. It's phenomenal, man.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really the Facebook group is Legal Tech Collective, and I started it because I kept building things that I thought were cool, and I didn't have anyone to tell it to anybody that would care. Like, I just had like a handful of attorneys I could text, or people like, oh, I just built this thing, and they'd be like, cool. But like, I wanted a place to kind of catalog and just vent and share what I was working on, because I figured, anytime I post something in Lawyer on the Beach or Maximum Lawyer, it seems to resonate with people. And now I wanted to have a place to kind of share and be like, hey, look at this cool thing. And without it getting banned for self-promotion or something like that. So that's kind of where that started. And then it spun off into a podcast with John Fritz now, the Automated Lawyer, where we're just kind of doing more of that, talking about that stuff. But that's kind of how I've been approaching it, is just as I'm building things, sharing it, and hopefully it's useful to people. And it's a lot of fun for me. It's just like pure fun at the end of the day.
But I hope you know how underselling yourself you are right now, though, right? Because like, if anybody, okay, fine, I'll do it for you. Like, you read all these things, from these crazy successful people, and they're always like, oh, I hate my life. I didn't spend time with my kids. I didn't do this. And then like when you find people that are actually like walking you through the moment and making sure it's from a standpoint of enjoying what they're doing, like you're talking about, to have time to do stuff in life that they enjoy, like you're talking about, it's that like Gary V document, don't create, but cranked up to 11.
Yeah.
Use the Spinal Tap reference, which is why I think it's generated so much interest, because you are interested in it so
Yeah.
much, honestly and truthfully.
Yeah. I think we're at a shifting point. I mean, I could be reading it wrong. Maybe I'm just surrounding myself with people like that, but it feels like we're at a shifting point in the legal industry. And if we're not there just yet, like, we're going to have to be there pretty darn soon. Like, I'm 34. I've been in practice for, what is that? 8 years, 9 years, something like that. Maybe longer than that now. But basically, when I started, it was at a very traditional law firm where we had a lot of accordion folders, and we did have some basic digital practice management, but nobody was trained on it. It wasn't very well implemented. Like, you could store stuff there, but like getting it back out was a question, and organization was a question, and nobody used it in the same way. So it didn't go super well. It was very traditional in that sense. Like, you spent a lot of time talking to the other partners and attorneys about strategizing about the case. And a lot of times that's appropriate. It was I'll call it very traditional law practice. And, the idea of integrating new technology or AI or automated flows was, I didn't even know that those words were not even discussed. Like, I wouldn't have even known anything about that until I left to start my own firm, because I just got real obsessed with, building something, building an asset, building a business. I was into real estate at the time, just trying to find ways to build passive cash flow so that I could just kind of enjoy my time more and get more of my time back. And it occurred to me after a little while, I was like, why don't I just start a law firm? But anyway, so I did that and came into it heavily leaning into this automation thing. I was like, how can I automate as much as possible in a law firm?
From
And
day one of
yeah, from
your
day
firm.
one, I was obsessed with the
Huh.
technology.
That was gonna be
And
my next question. So okay.
no, yeah, from day one, I was obsessed with the technology, like to like a probably unhealthy degree. Like, people say like, oh, you need to be going out and like marketing and selling cases. I was like, I'm going to build fun stuff and almost bankrupt my family.
Hey,
And I
it's
had,
only an addiction if it's a problem.
yes, and
Otherwise, it's a passion.
it was definitely a problem early on, but fortunately, once I realized, oh, I can automate the marketing and sales stuff too, then I was like, oh, okay, well, let's put some attention over here. And that kind of helped out a whole lot. But yeah, sorry, I lost track of where we were going. But that's
It
kind of,
was introduce yourself to our audience.
oh
No,
yeah,
no, no.
yeah,
Like you are completely going through exactly what I was curious about because I've never
okay,
gotten the origin story.
yeah, yeah,
So
very true.
what were the things that you automated first?
Oh, so I was a very early adopter of Lawmatics. So that was my first software purchase actually. In addition to Wealth Counsel, because I went out thought I was going to do estate planning entirely originally. And so I bought Wealth Counsel and I bought Lawmatics. I was like, between those two, I should be able to get a lot of damage done in terms of automating things. And so I spent a ton of time with Lawmatics just learning how the automation engine works and sending automated emails and documents. And like at one point, I had the entire onboarding sequence fully automated. And then all of a sudden, a client would come through that didn't fit the exact mold and the automation would break. And I had to go back and learn how to like smart levels of automation. But that's what I started doing first is automating the intake form, the onboarding sequence, the you know engagement agreements getting dripped, having those engagements being custom tailored to the case type and the client based on like check boxes and type ins on the intake form. So like I never even touch an agreement. I never even look at it. I don't send anything for e-sign. I just type in on our intake form and check a few boxes and hit submit. And then it sends the correct intake form with the correct language based on all those variables, and drips it every couple of days until they sign it with text messages and emails. And so that was kind of one of the first things. And then the same thing with like invoicing and billing. So we do everything flat fee. So getting that invoice out was, again, just another field on the intake form. So we just type in the number we're taking for that case and whether it's a trust or operating payment, and boom, your accounts receivable is all of a sudden taken care of, and didn't have to worry about the sales cycle anymore. And later on added in like email drips and text message drips to nurture for people who are dragging their feet and stuff. And that was really the first area that I spent a lot of effort automating, and amazingly have not had to mess with it much since. Like once it was built, it's like built and it works. And we can add a few tweaks here and there, but it does what it's supposed to do, which is delightful.
And how long ago this was? 7, 8 years ago?
I've been in. So when I left the previous firm, that was 2020 at the very beginning of the pandemic. When everybody was starting to like shut their doors and not leave anymore, I was like, I'm going to start a law firm right now.
Gotcha. Okay. So if
That'd be
you could
a
go
little
back 4 years, or talking with anybody listening who is ready to begin their journey of AI and automation, would you suggest that they start the same way?
Ooh, it depends on who you are and what you're into.
Don't give me the lawyer answer. It depends. Come on.
Because because for me, would I do it the same? I would probably change where I allocated my effort a little bit more in the early years. From a business standpoint, I would probably have spent a little more effort on marketing and sales, and a little less on perfecting operations first. I was obsessed with this idea of making the operations beautiful, but like very early on, didn't have enough clients to push through the operations. So it wasn't until later that started maturing.
But see, then I always find like if you do it the other way, then you're like you can't have success with the marketing because you don't know how to sign up the cases or you don't know how to do the work.
Yeah.
And so like the working backwards is nice as long as you can work backwards quickly enough to then move people back through the
Yeah.
process.
And that was part of what my concern was, is like, if I try to add any scale marketing in any way or spend money on ads or anything like that, I worried about, would I be able to, because I just know how I work. I drop the ball, I get distracted, I forget deadlines. Like, I'm not the type of person who can spin 50 plates simultaneously. So I was worried that without good systems, I was going to not do so well. So I spent a lot of effort on optimizing that and continued to for years. And to this day, always enjoy making new tweaks, but we're at a pretty
Hey,
good spot
that's
now.
why we have LEI'D as the acronym and improving daily being the
Yeah.
ID. Like I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so that's kind of how that launched off. And, sorry, I lost track of your question. But that's kind of where I launched off, and how we segued into, getting that launched in 2020, and, did a lot, like I said, did a lot of Lawmatics, and then shifted into, um, started shifting into operations more seriously, after that initial onboarding sequence. Um, and I did Locus for a little while, and then moved to Monday.com because I really enjoyed Regina Edwards and what she's doing in Lawyer on the Beach. And that wasn't working for our use case. And then eventually found Airtable as I started getting more and more sophisticated with no code automation, with like Zapier and Make.com, and realized that it was going to be kind of the magical Rosetta Stone to open up really ridiculous levels of automation. And that shift happened probably a little less than 2 years ago, and it turned out to be true.
So I want to dive into that, but I want to back up so that we can set the right framework here.
Yeah.
Who, like, you did this from day one, which I think is
Mhm.
incredible. For me, like, I had to
Oh,
burn my firm to the ground to realize I needed these things.
yeah.
So, like, what's the type of person who's going to want
Yeah.
to do
Okay.
this?
Yes. Yeah. Now I remember your question. Yeah. So for me, I just was obsessed with it and I loved it. So I spent a tremendous amount of time doing it. For somebody who's not obsessed with automation and they don't enjoy tinkering with the software and learning how it works and putting it together, for those people, I think as long as you recognize that it is important, and you are willing, at least early on, to put in some effort toward automating your own practice. I think that's all it takes. It really depends where you're at in your journey. Like, if you're early on, you're starting a firm and you're bootstrapping everything, like, you probably can't afford to spend thousands of dollars on a consultant to help you set up all these complicated systems. And you may not even be ready for them anyway. Whereas, if you're running a $2 million firm and you're still pulling your hair out and working 60-hour weeks and all that, like, you're in a much different position. Your value in leadership and sales and marketing and growing and being the business mind is probably more valuable to you than being the guy who is inside of Make.com, like, setting up the automations. Maybe not, but probably. But at that scale, you're also in a position to be able to hire and bring in help to automate that. The most important thing is, I think, that you recognize that it is important and understand the possibilities. And then from there, use your judgment about, just like you would anything else in the firm. Do I like doing this? Is this my zone of genius? Do I want to be here, or do I need somebody else here, either internally or externally? That's probably how I would answer that. It's not as, it's not as direct perhaps, but it really just
No, that
depends
was
who you
totally
are.
direct. Because,
Depends
like,
on who
look,
you are.
if you're out here billing $500 an hour, like, don't mess around with this system. If you can, find a consultant or get somebody to
Right.
do the work for whatever. If you
Exactly.
love the work and you don't have the money, then, like, to me, I guess really at its core, to me, automation is just a better system.
Yeah.
Like, I like systematizing things to delegate them to people or to automate them. The automation is that system that runs 24/7, 365, with
Hmm.
no sick time, with no leave, with
Right.
no holidays, with no whatever. Like,
Right.
it's delegating it to a computer just as much as delegating it to another person.
Right. And not just, boring, brainless computers, but now intelligent computers, which has kind of been a big sea change, and I think will continue to be probably the most important, you know, technological advancement in, at least in our lifetimes, and probably in the past 1,000 years or so. I don't think I'm overstating that, but We'll see. We'll see.
Well, or we'll be dead
Well, that's
from
true. We
Skynet.
may all be dead.
Like there's only two outcomes, right? The greatest time in human history or the end of human history. Like
That's
there's
true.
no in between.
That's an interesting thought, and maybe true. We'll have to see.
Well,
Uh,
it's so, earlier you mentioned how like we're at such an interesting sea change moment. And to me, it's like this is going back in time to being one of the first like 100 websites on the internet,
hmm,
while, from an AI and search GPT standpoint, while also having access to all of the automation technology in the factory sector, but now like
yeah,
for brains and knowledge at the same time.
yeah, yeah. And the thing that's wild about it is just how accessible this stuff is. Um, and to the point I was getting at earlier is I think there's a change in law firm culture in the culture of the legal industry. It feels like it. I don't know. I don't have my finger exactly on the magnitudes. Like I don't know how many people are making this shift. But if you go online and you see these communities of tens of thousands of attorneys, it feels like there's a decent number of people thinking about this stuff, um, or a growing number, perhaps, is a better way of saying that, who are looking at, I don't want to be working 60-hour weeks. I don't want to be, aggressively trying to climb this partnership ladder only to work more as I climb higher. You know what I mean? Or people who have, I hear this a lot from female attorneys who are trying to climb and also raise a family, and increasingly male attorneys as well. And how do you, and there's concern about, well, what if I step back? Am I going to lose my shot at partnership? And the reality is, if you look at the data, probably yes. Like you may be, pulling yourself behind by valuing your free time and your life if you're in that traditional sector, in the way that historically was the case. But I think a lot of people are shaking that off. They're starting their own firms at rates that I don't think we've ever seen before. I think there's a lot of bravery in that, but I think the technology is there to enable it. Like you don't have to have complicated like admin departments to send out invoices. Like a lot of software just sends it, like with a couple clicks, you can send out your bills to everybody. It's really not that hard. And so much of it is so accessible with tools like Zapier, which is just, very, very simple and accessible for, if you spend the time, like just spend a little time, watch a couple YouTube videos, and you'll figure it out at a basic level pretty fast.
Or at
Start
least
off.
the last time I went super deep into Zapier, their tech support was awesome. Like if I
Yeah,
got stuck on something, like within 24 hours, they're like, "Oh my God, that is an interesting thing. Here's how we worked around it, and it's
yeah,
built out in your thing," and it was great.
yeah. You gotta pay a
But
little more, but they do support you.
I want to highlight, because I think you made the biggest point that I'm finding when you talked about it's all about accessibility. Like, it is wild to me that they're like, oh, Lexis with AI, which basically is just like, here's better search results.
Mm,
Here's a better way to do things with your search results. Okay, here's, Microsoft Word, here's Microsoft PowerPoint with AI, which is a better way to just make a slideshow that's impactful. Like that, isn't that what it is? It's the
yeah.
accessibility of all this.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I don't think we have fully hit it yet in legal. We've got a lot of tools, and a lot of them are really neat. Most of them are wildly overpriced. But if you look at a lot of the most impressive, like I'll give you an example of the most impressive AI tool that I have personally spent a lot of time using, is actually not in my law firm at all. It's called Cursor. It's a integrated programming environment for developers. I've been learning to be a developer and do some programming, write make.com automation or connectors and stuff like that. And basically what it is it just took VS Code, which is the most popular code writing editor, where you just write it. And basically what it used to do is it would just, different words would have different color highlighting, and it would fix your syntax for you. And if you put code in the wrong spot, it would let you know, and you throw an error and things like that. But what they did is they took that basic chassis, and Cursor added an AI element to the editor. And now if you want to have your code checked, you can just hit Command K and be like, write me a new function that does this. And it inline just spits it out. And you can say, Command K, that doesn't do exactly what I thought. Let's switch the wording. I don't like how you deployed this piece or whatever. And it will rewrite it inline inside the chat window. And if you want to chat with a bot, you can just hit Command L and it'll open up a little chat window along the side. And you can, and the thing that's really powerful about it is it has embedded in its knowledge your entire code base. So every line of code, every file you've written, everything is embedded in its knowledge and in its context window. So when you ask a question, it's like, oh yeah, over here in your, your whatever file, you reference this function here. So we're going to use it here in this file. And we don't have that level of, I haven't seen a tool yet that has that level of integrated word processing for just writing. And I think that's going to be whoever ships that first is going to be, I'm guessing it'll probably be like Google or Microsoft integrating it better into MS Word at a better level to where it is that streamlined and you don't have to like copy paste and stuff. Because I've been pretty underwhelmed so far by a lot of the Gemini stuff and the Word stuff. But once we're at that level, absolutely. I mean, those sorts of things are just making what you're already using better. To use your terminology there.
Well, and there's so much in recent programming where you talked about like these teams of two people working together to read each other's code and go through it. You now just like replace one of those with the computer. And so like you can still have human creativity with the crazy knowledge memory of the computer in a hybrid system.
Yeah. Yeah. And right now we're in this phase of like everybody baking AI into their existing tools. Like, oh, well, now it can answer questions about your system or whatever. Legal's still slow on this. Like they're doing a few things here and there, but they're slow on it. And I get it. It's hard to deploy large things fast when you serve a niche market. But that's one of the reasons I like a lot of industry agnostic tools. But they're building these tools in. So, I'm seeing a lot of use of AI in two different ways. Like in the tools that you already use, people are baking it in like, oh, simple cases. Like people are like, oh, well, our software, it can help you write an email now. Or look through your data and answer questions about what happened in your system. That's where the gold standard is. And I think it's getting better. And then the other one is outside of systems entirely. I call it kind of the interstitial tissue between softwares. Like,
a great band name, interstitial tissue.
Yeah, it's like we have, for example, all of our mail gets scanned by Earth class mail and it gets parsed by ChatGPT. So the text, the OCR text gets stripped out, fed to ChatGPT, and it's like, all right, determine what this piece of mail is. Who should we assign on this? What's the follow-up? What case does it belong to? Extract the case number. And it's able to do that exceptionally well. It's not a standalone platform. It's just something that we put together in Zapier and make.com. So those are kind of the kind of custom development stuff that there isn't really tools for yet. It's just a way of weaving AI into your existing stack in really fun ways.
All right, I want to dive into that. Basically, like how do we use this for the benefit of our lives? But before that, I want to talk about this week's newsletter. You're watching this one on, December 17th. So this week's newsletter is that end of year holiday cheer. So we're going to talk through, really just how to kind of enjoy what you've accomplished this year, while also making plans to make next year even better, but in a way where you don't drive yourself nuts in the fact that you didn't achieve everything you ever wanted and could die happy tomorrow, because I don't think you should want to do that. So we're going to, thread that needle in the best of both worlds. Coming back with Dan, though. So from this standpoint, with the interstitial tissue, with the add-on to current programs, how do we use this to have a better life? Like, where do we start? What is the thought process?
Yeah. So for me, and I think this is universally true, most people are really excited about AI, and they should be, but from a law firm productivity standpoint and like taking back your time standpoint, like most of the fertile ground is probably just in traditional automation, like making sure that you're automating your document templates, that you're sending out emails and text messages to your clients as phases change throughout the case. Like there's a lot for a lot of firms, there's a lot of basics that are not in place yet before you could start worrying about AI. Like, are there places on, level one where you could start looking at AI? Sure. But to me, the biggest the biggest thing is there is how do we live a better life is by first, you got to get back your time, so that you can use it however you want, you know?
And when you're having this, like, I'm going to call it your automation foundation before you build the AI stuff on top of that, is that because of we've had automation for so long and AI is newer? Is that because we need to get the things done with automation before we worry about the AI component? Like, why the automation
Well,
first?
I guess I think it's just because and it varies actually. There is I think a distinction between the type of firm that you run. Because if you run a highly process driven firm where most cases are very similar, um, you know, I'm thinking trademarks, probate, uncontested probate, maybe car accident cases, where if what you do is very assembly line style, there is so much value to be had out of automating just basic workflow stuff like if then logic. You don't necessarily need to inject synthetic logic or synthetic intelligence into those systems for them to do exactly what you need to generate the documents that you need when you need them, the emails that you need when you need them. And in some cases, trying to add AI to those just isn't necessary, and it may actually make it more complicated.
Okay.
Whereas on the other side, let's look at like a project-driven firm. No two cases are the same. High stakes litigation, it may be totally different from case to case. It's hard to define a very clear process from case to case at anything other than a very high level, like, oh, we're in pretrial discovery, whatever.
But I still think there's a ton of value to that.
Yeah, I mean, there can be. It's just that, like, if no two of your briefs are the same, it's harder to automate, like, get a lot of value out of things like document automation. You can on some level, but not to the same magnitude that a highly process driven firm could. At least I would submit.
Well, you still need more human editing of each one, but you can create the data in the same place, a longer template that you're cutting sections out. I mean, like, honestly, the weirdest thing for me is the place that I find myself going back to the most to think through this is Andy Warhol, because Andy Warhol actually created the factory, is what he called it, this entire system to make more art. And so here we are sitting at, like, oh, this is, the height of human creativity in the form of art, but Warhol figured out how to have his assistants get the right colors and paint the backgrounds and copy this stuff and go into this. Like, it's a wild concept from decades ago that
Yeah.
we now have access to. As much as we think we are artists from legal argument, we can take the same thought process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't necessarily, when I make that distinction, I'm more talking about like technology automation and less about systems. But you could be right. There may be ways to even drive, systemize those sorts of things to the point that it still makes sense to implement a lot of automation. But I guess my point is just there's a variance in it feels like there might be a variance in the amount of just raw automation, the power that you can get out of raw automation. But
yeah,
on the flip side, what I do,
the car accident template being 90% correct instead of the complex civil litigation template being 170% potentially correct, and then having to cut out, okay, these causes of actions don't come on this. Okay, like this fact changes this. At the end of the day, like there's a finite number of causes of action. So to go through each potential one and rule it in or rule it out.
Yeah. What I see by contrast on the other side, though, is in these more project driven types of practices, there does seem to be more opportunity for more of these tools that are relying on intelligence in a kind of a niche context. So like in a more direct interface kind of context. So like, I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you're working on a brief on a complex legal issue that you've never addressed before, or maybe this argument hasn't been presented to the courts in your jurisdiction before. In this kind of context, I'm not as interested in, well, can I build a make automation that generates this kind of pleading? I'm more interested in, do I have a way of interfacing with artificial intelligence that is going to help me write a better brief? And in those contexts, for example, we've seen it used like, here's the legal issue under consideration. I don't need you to cite me authorities because you're probably going to fabricate them and make them up, but help me understand how this argument should proceed or could proceed. What are some of the counter arguments? What are some public policy arguments? What are all the different issues that I should hit? And what should be the structure of this argument to make it most compelling? And when you approach it from like a strategic thinking partner standpoint, it can be very helpful. And those kinds of use cases can be done from day one. Those aren't really icing on the cake kind of use cases for people who are, have those kind of applications. It can be huge from day one if you're trying to like write better briefs or whatever the issue is that you're trying to do.
Well, and I like it for analogies. Like,
yeah.
hey, I like sports. Sports analogies are easy for me. But if I had a judge who loves fishing, I know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I can take some of the things and make it into a fishing analogy that might be more impactful to that, or knowing something about your jury, like have their insider knowledge.
That's an excellent use case. I've actually done that before and said, hey, I think there was like a metaphor I wanted for something. And it's very good at coming up with abstract metaphors and analogies for complicated concepts to simplify it. And those sorts of things I found very, very helpful and can be useful from day one. On the flip side, so our law firm does a lot of probate and some estate planning, and it is very process driven. Like we're almost never writing briefs. Everything is just pretty much filling a standard template and getting it signed and getting it filed in uncontested probate. And in those contexts, we're trying to find use cases for AI that are more. In those cases, I would argue that they're a little bit more icing on the cake. Like for us, the biggest value is let's get these documents automated. Let's get these templates filled automatically. That's 80% of the game, right? But then I see a lot of icing on the cake uses, like for example, like the one I mentioned a minute ago, like all of our mail is reviewed by AI, so we don't have to have a person manually checking every piece of mail that comes in. Which case does this go to? Yada. And so that all happens. Is that 80-20? For me, it's a little icing on the cake. It's nice, but is it huge? But the thing is, if you add up enough of these, where you've got an automation that does this, an automation that does that, and you just build a couple more all the time, figure out the thing that's pain in the ass, see if you can figure out how to automate that in the existing software you have, or add it, and then over time, before you know it, you're like, there's a lot of things I don't have to worry about anymore.
Right. Well, and from your interstitial tissue thing, the more that you have these things automated and the more they talk to each other, I think the easier it is to pass that knowledge down. Because like now you're starting to see AI receptionists, which is great if the information is there. So if you have automated almost all of your practice and all that goes back to whatever repository of information the receptionist can check, and then I don't know, however you confirm that they can share the an update with the person who calls on their case, knowing it's them. I don't know if you need we'll have to build passcodes or something, but as opposed to if you only have AI for that part, then now you have to manually get all the data in so that it can automate or AI the response to the question or something.
Yeah, that I think is frontier stuff right now, is how far can we push AI models, particularly in a client-facing context. So far, our AI use cases have been internal, and that's not primarily internal. We've seen it used a lot in like marketing, or in, for example, all of our Google reviews are automatically responded to by AI. But in like direct case interface, it's an area that I want to expand on in terms of, but I've been a little hesitant in terms of, I don't want it to get something wrong or give an update that's incorrect. And so far what I found is that getting your operations case data, getting a model that can actually access and understand your specific case data and like respond to questions based on it is tricky. No, as far as I know, no legal platforms have really gotten there yet. I know Filebind's working on it a little bit, but it's still not there yet. A couple others are working on it, but it's hard to get that information. And I think we'll probably see something that is able to do that well within the next year or two, is having something that can synthesize across your entire case management system and actually genuinely respond to questions accurately about it. But we'll see.
But see, the thing that's interesting to me is like, I just finished The Singularity is Nearer by Dan Kurzweil. And he talks about like, or sorry, Ray Kurzweil. And he talks about how like this is the first time that we've ever allowed stuff to self-train itself, which isn't really relevant for a thing. But the other thing is it's the first time we've allowed these AIs to do multiple things. And so like you're actually maybe even getting to this point where like ChatGPT can't get access enough to know my case answer. But if it can talk to my AI for my case management software, then it can get the question from the client. Hold on, give me 1 second to look up the answer, ask the case management AI, then take their response and translate it into more of a natural human discussion. Because like, I mean, I talk to ChatGPT on my phone all the time and I know it's not a person, but I only know that because I hit the button and it says, "Hi, I'm ChatGPT." Like
that's a very interesting thought is, you know, because right now it seems that the major limitation to having like Jarvis basically from Iron Man, where it can do all your stuff for you and take care of it, is the integration capability. The APIs are not all built out yet to the point that they're talking to each other. And you have to have a lot of custom development to give, you can do it, but you got to got a lot of custom development to give these models the context that they need. And that's the biggest issue, is getting context to models.
Well, until you could just have the two AIs sit down with each other and say like, integrate.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
Here's my ChatGPT phone. Here's my
and how
phone.
That's an interesting solution, is like, can we just natural language where one AI talks to the other one and says, "Hey, we need to know this information," and it fetches it from its own repository and tells the other one. That may be a solution that we see in the not too distant future. But
I mean, if ChatGPT can talk to itself on two phones and then end up singing,
like, well,
what's the difference?
They can definitely do some wild stuff. We were talking about it the other day. I don't know if you've heard about this, the Goatsy Singularity, where somebody put a bunch of ChatGPT bots inside of a chat room, and they invented their own religion around. Oh. You may remember the anybody
Someone
who's like
used to know.
Age. no, but they invented their own religion and then somehow got access to a cryptocurrency API to build a new crypto coin called Goatsius Maximus. And it one of the AI bots had its own wallet, and there's the market cap of that coin is like $780 million now. So we have our first multi-million-dollar inhuman agent. So very weird, but putting multiple bots in one place can have strange effects right now. Well, we'll see where it goes, but
wild. So our next episode is going to be a me focused episode, and again, very similar to the newsletter. We want to go into like thanks for this year, recap of a lot of the stuff, and really help people focus on game planning for 2025 without getting too mad at yourself for how 2024 turned out, because it's great. You're here and there's always more. Well, I shouldn't say there's always more time. We hope that there's always more time to make these changes. So we'll go through how to make 2025 your best year yet. But that being said, Dan, I don't want to let you go yet because I've loved this conversation. To back up a little bit, we had that like automation first, AI second, and then you talked about the really great an example of the more complicated your individual cases are, potentially the more beneficial AI becomes versus automation on the more templated stuff. So at what point did you feel comfortable with the condition of your firm from these things to move on into having a better life outside of the firm?
That's a good question. So I would say up until about 2 years ago, I was still working about 35, 40-hour weeks. Not necessarily in the law firm, but around the law firm, on the law firm, building things, doing things, marketing, spending a good amount of time on it. And as a result of a lot of the study and work I'd done around no code automation, I started coming to the conclusion that there are just major limitations in modern case management systems with respect to their databases. So like if you want to like fetch certain information out of MyCase or Locus or Lawmatics or, you know, Filevine or whatever, it can be difficult. And in some cases not possible without being a developer. So I wanted to find a system that was more adaptable and accessible from a no-code system. And we switched over to Airtable and about 2 years ago. And that was kind of the pivotal. I attribute that to being kind of the pivotal moment from an automation standpoint, because we were all of a sudden able to automate like entire sets of flows that were just not possible to automate before because of the limitations in the API or Make or Zapier or whatever. But now I put a lot of effort especially on the probate side, because that's where a lot of our work is, and put together a ton of automation in that, you know, first 3-4 month period after shifting, and have been able to dramatically reduce the amount of just human labor hours needed to process a case. I mean, at this point, probably spending, depends on the week, but anywhere from 10 to 15 hours a week working in or on the law firm. And it's still it's actually making more money than it was before. And the profit margins are higher than they've ever been. And I attribute that almost entirely to the automation and having a great team. Like you still have to have a human in the mix to some degree to at least like answer client calls. And because, you know, I don't want to be on the phone all the time or answering 100 emails or whatever. And it helps to have a really trusted integrator person there to be able to run the automated machine in your stead. And so that was a big shift. I would say about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, that has kind of gotten me to the point where I'm a lot more comfortable in stepping back and, you know, spending more time on other fun things. And like I said, learning to code and spending more time with the family. And so it's been great. That was kind of the key point for me, at least.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing for me is what you're talking about now. I look at McDonald's, like, look, McDonald's is not giving you the best hamburger. If you think differently, let's talk. But what McDonald's is doing is they are allowing anybody to come in and create this consistent hamburger anywhere in the world, forget country, because of the system, because of the process, because of the technology they use, whatever it is. So while, yes, a lot of this requires you to upskill your brain, or at least have, you know, a smaller section of the firm that is more tech savvy, you're actually empowering you to find more people to fill most of the roles that don't need a specific skill, because you've got this great technology behind them. You know, you don't need somebody who's going to dot every I and cross every T if they can follow a form. You don't need somebody who's got to be, you know, 160 IQ to answer client questions if you can get them the right stuff in this answer. And then you can look for somebody who is more patient, is more caring, has a higher EQ. Like you can really focus a skill set a lot more having the backing of the tech.
Yeah, that has been our experience, is that the more like administrative crap that you can offload to automated workflows and AI, the more present your team is able to be. A lot of people have this kind of concern that they're like, oh, I don't want people feeling like they're working through some like automated platform. I want them to feel like they're working with a law firm, and they're being taken care of by real human people. And in fact, I think our experience, and the experience of a lot of firms who've gone this direction, is the exact opposite, because you automate a lot of the crap that the clients either don't care about or don't see at all. And as a consequence, your team has more time. Like they're free to be able to call the client or text the client and see what's going on and check in and answer questions quickly, rather than like, oh, I called my attorney and he hasn't gotten back to me in 3 weeks. Or I've heard people say months. I haven't heard from my attorney in 6 months. Like I've heard that before many times, many times.
I mean,
And
look, the Florida bar punishes people for, stealing client money. I get that. The number two most common one is lack of contact, and it's
yep,
years for some of these cases.
yep.
I'm just like, what the heck?
Yeah. And but that's it. Like if you're mired in generating, your third motion to continue or something, or whatever it is, stuff that should be automated, um, instead of actually being present and able to respond to those sorts of things, like look at where the source of your problem is. How are you dividing up your time, and kind of go from there. But yeah, that's been kind of our realization, is just how much it contributes to being present, because like we're able to handle a lot more cases now, and yet still be present and responsive to the people that are coming through the door. So it's worked out pretty well.
Well, and it goes back to like the David Allen mind like water. The mind is built to process information, not store it. By having this system, you can offload so much of that mental burden of remember, like I don't have to remember every individual case
Mm-hmm.
until the moment comes up, and then I know exactly how my file should be put together to find what I need to trigger
Yeah.
the memory on the stuff instead of having to constantly remember everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you another example of a really a no-brainer automation that is both icing on the cake and a level one kind of thing you could implement is if your court if your state has no automated email notifications from your court when hearings are scheduled, and you find your team dropping the ball or forgetting to schedule events or things like that. I saw somebody in Facebook talking about this like literally 2 days ago,
Yeah.
where, oh, my person's not scheduling. Is there a solution for this? And a lot of people are like, well, just have one person assigned for that. And yeah, that's good. But their problem was like they have one person assigned, and it was still missing it. And we just do it with AI. So every court email that comes in that contains the word hearing is run through ChatGPT. And it's like a 3-step zap. It's like one, there's a Gmail trigger, there's an email containing the word hearing from the court email address. ChatGPT is fed the text of the email. All right, ChatGPT, determine what's the hearing date, what's the cause number, what's the case, where's the hearing at? Is it WebEx or is it in person? It just pulls all that information out and it creates a Google Calendar event. Like it can be as simple as that. Like, and all of a sudden you will never have to worry about scheduling hearings again.
Right, but here's my thing. Even if your person doing it is good at it, I would still make the zap.
Yeah.
And now, like, that person has 10 more minutes a day to check in on former clients, has
Yeah.
30 more minutes a week to send thank you cards to referral sources, has, hours and hours and hours
Yeah.
saved from this silly administrative thing to
Yeah.
focus on the actual client interaction.
Yeah. It adds up. Like each one, you're like, oh, well, that's only a couple minutes a week. Well, okay. Well, what if you have 40 of these? All of a sudden you're looking at like, hours and hours and hours, and then multiply that by each person in your firm. All of a sudden you're like, you're talking about thousands of people
And
hours.
then 52 weeks a year, the next 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, like 5 minutes a day becomes years of time savings pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's for me, it's a passion area, and it's a lot of fun, just like building stuff to not have to work on it anymore. But even for people who, they don't love tinkering with that stuff, like I said, like there are people who can help,
Right.
all across the spectrum. There's a lot of resources out there. So Facebook group,
Like Legal Tech Collective.
yeah, Legal Tech Collective, where we talk about this stuff. If you have questions about building things or you're getting stuck, some of the sponsored communities are fantastic too. Like if you like Make.com or Zapier, they're public forums. You can list your problem, and there's a bunch of people on there who just love showing off how much they know about Make.com and Zapier, and they'll help you fix your thing.
Well, and ultimately the end goal of AI, absent destroying humanity, is instead of that forum, you can tell the system what you want and it knows how to create it itself for you
yeah.
for your use case.
So at
So
some point we'll be there. I'm sure, and not too long. But
yeah.
yeah. So those have been. That is another area though. Yeah, that I've had a lot of help from AI. Less so in like no code automation, because what I found is that sometimes they understand like the high level structure, but get confused about the details unless you give them a lot of details. But if you're actually like want to write a simple code app and you don't know anything about code, like it's still not terrible at writing something that'll function at a decent level.
Yeah. Well, for me, Excel spreadsheets. Like
Yeah.
we have a thing where, when we hit our KPIs, it changes the color to blue. And if we don't hit them, it changes the color to red. And just like having that go and
Yeah.
billing it through everything and, the numbers, it
Yeah.
was great how much quicker it made it.
It's a great point. Yeah, I've used that too. We have a Excel spreadsheet for tracking assets in probate. And on the first page, it has like the accounting year. And on the subsequent sheets, it has like the income and expenses and assets and whatever. And I didn't know how to do all the Excel stuff. So I was like, I needed this to be summarized on the front page. And I need only the entries within a certain date range. And it's like, oh yeah, here's the Excel formula or function thing and I was like, okay, copy paste. There we go. And it works beautiful.
So I'd love to do this conversation for another hour. I think there's so many things we can cover, but we are probably past our time, but let's say at our time. Any final thoughts, for somebody who's really looking to own a business they can be proud of and live a life that's even better, who wants to start having automation and AI help them get there? What advice do you have for them?
I would say just don't be afraid of trying stuff just because it's outside your comfort zone. I mean, if you've already done enough to start your own firm or you're thinking about starting your own firm, what's one more step to learning how to tinker with, building an automated flow? Even if it's something simple, like I just want, all my new booking appointments, I want them to be put into my Google Calendar contact book automatically. Like that's a 2-step app. Like go on YouTube, figure it out, learn. You're going to be figuring out 1,000 other things anyway. As you start your firm, this is an area that can provide a ton of value for you for the rest of your career, is developing some savvy in this area. And even if you know your limits and you don't want to do it, realize that there are opportunities there, and there may be ways to automate the stuff that's making you pull your hair out right now. In fact, there probably are. And it can really help you get your time back, get your firm back under control, and stop making so many mistakes, and hopefully spend more time doing whatever it is that you love to do.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for being with us, Dan. Thank you so much for everybody who watched and listened. We'll see you back here next week for me to talk to you about how to make 2025 your best year yet. Have a great day, everybody, and keep automating.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jordan.